I woke up on the morning of my birthday with a quiet kind of anticipation in my heart. At my age, I don't expect grand parties, surprise cakes or decorations scattered across the living room anymore. No, those days are long behind me. What I look forward to now is something far simpler, something softer, a phone call, a message, a sign that the people I love most in this world still remember me, that I still matter. The sun was already rising, and the light pushed its way through the curtains like it had done countless times before. I sat up, ran my hand through my thinning hair, and smiled at the memory of birthdays past. I remembered my daughter's tiny hands tugging at my arm, waking me up early when she was a child. She would hold out a card, sometimes messy with glue and sparkles, sometimes just a piece of paper with a big, shaky heart drawn in the center. But always it was filled with love. I clung to those memories as I shuffled into the kitchen, making myself coffee in the same chipped mug I've had for decades. I thought, any moment now, she'll call. I could almost hear her laughter, that spark of warmth in her voice when she'd say, "Happy birthday, Dad." The hours slipped by. Morning turned into afternoon, and still, the phone sat on the table in silence. I told myself not to be dramatic. Maybe she was busy. Maybe work had tied her up. Or she was out running errands. After all, life gets hectic. But in my heart, I kept replaying the same thought. How could she forget? By the time the clock struck 3, the silence had started to weigh on me. It wasn't just about the day, it was about everything that day represented. Birthdays aren't about the number of candles or the cake anymore. They're reminders that we're still seen, still valued, still loved. And when no one remembers, it's as though the world is whispering, "You don't matter as much anymore." I sat in my armchair, staring out the window as memories poured in uninvited. I remembered staying up late when she was a teenager, waiting until I heard the sound of the door closing, making sure she got home safe. I remembered the nights I worked double shifts, just so she could go on school trips and never feel left out. I remembered the promises I made to her when her mother passed away, that no matter what, she would never feel alone. And yet, here I was feeling more alone than I ever thought possible. The phone buzzed suddenly, and my heart leaped. I grabbed it quickly, only to see it was a reminder from the pharmacy about a prescription refill. I let out a long sigh, sinking back into the chair. The disappointment stung more than I wanted to admit. As the day dragged on, I started asking myself questions I didn't want to face. Did I do something wrong? Had I become a burden without realizing it? Or was it simply that I no longer occupied the same space in her heart as she did in mine? When evening settled in, and the light outside dimmed to a soft orange, I finally admitted the truth to myself. She had forgotten. My daughter, the person I raised, the one I gave everything to, had forgotten the day I was born. That realization didn't just sting, it cut deep. It was as though the world had gone quiet, and all I could hear was the echo of my own heartbeat reminding me of what I had lost. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was only a date, just another number on the calendar. But inside, I knew it was more than that. Birthdays are about acknowledgement. They're about love, and in that silence, I felt something inside me crack, something that whispered, maybe she doesn't need you anymore. I went to bed that night with tears stinging my eyes, clutching at memories that felt further away than ever. Little did I know, it would only take one note, one message written from the depths of my heart to change everything. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness still sitting on my chest. I had never been one to wallow for long, but the ache of yesterday lingered. I couldn't shake the thought that my daughter had forgotten me. Not just the date, not just the occasion, but me. I walked to the desk in my room, the same one cluttered with old letters, photographs, and receipts from years past. And that's when the idea came to me. If words had once carried me through grief, perhaps they could also bridge the silence. I picked up a pen and a piece of paper and began to write. Not a birthday reminder, not a complaint, but a note that carried the weight of my heart. I wrote about how birthdays aren't about gifts or celebration, but about being remembered. In this world I wrote about the nights I spent watching over her as a child, the sacrifices I made quietly, without ever wanting recognition, only her happiness. And finally, I wrote the words that had been sitting like stones in my chest. Asterisk, when the people we love forget us, it makes us wonder if we ever truly mattered. I didn't write with bitterness. I wrote with love, with longing, with the hope that she would see me not as a burden or an afterthought, but as the father who still lived and breathed for her smile. When I finished, I folded the note carefully and slid it into an envelope. My hands trembled as I sealed it, knowing this wasn't just paper and ink. This was my heart, exposed and raw. I placed the envelope where she would find it the next time she visited. And as I set it down, I whispered a quiet prayer. Asterisk, let her understand. Let her remember me, not just as her father, but as someone whose world once revolved around her. Asterisk, little did I know, that single note would shake her more deeply than any lecture, any argument, or any silence ever could. The days that followed after writing that note were long and quiet. I went about my usual routine, watering the garden, feeding the stray cats that liked to nap near the porch, sipping tea while watching the world pass by. But beneath those ordinary actions, my heart thumped with anticipation and unease. Would she read it? Would she understand? Or would she brush it aside like a discarded grocery list, too busy to care? I told myself not to expect too much. Expectations had a way of wounding more deeply than silence. Yet I couldn't deny the flicker of hope that burned inside me, fragile but persistent. 2 days later, my daughter showed up at my door. She didn't call ahead as she usually did. She simply appeared, standing there with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Eyes glistening, lips trembling as though she had rehearsed words she still couldn't bring herself to say. "Dad," she whispered, holding the envelope in her hand. My envelope, my note. Her voice cracked as she stepped inside, and before I could even invite her to sit, she wrapped her arms around me tightly, clinging as though she feared I might slip away if she let go. I don't know how I forgot. I don't know how I let it happen. Tears streamed down her face, soaking into my shirt. Your birthday, I don't have an excuse. I've been selfish, busy, blind. But when I read your words, Dad, it was like being punched in the chest. I realized I'd been taking you for granted. Hearing her breakdown stirred something in me I hadn't felt in a long time. Validation. Not because she was crying, but because she was finally seeing me not as a background figure in her busy life, but as the father who had given her everything he could. I patted her back gently, letting her cry, letting the silence of the moment hold us together. I never wanted you to feel guilty, I said softly. I just wanted you to remember. That's all. To remember that I'm still here, still me. She pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes with remorse and determination. I'll never forget again, Dad, I promise you that. But promises are easy to make when emotions are raw. The real test would come in the days ahead. Over the next few weeks, I noticed changes. They weren't grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but small, meaningful acts that touched me more than I can describe. She called more often, not just to check off a box, but to actually talk. She asked about my day, my health, the little things that made me feel seen. One evening, she invited me over for dinner. When I walked into her home, I saw the table set with care, my favorite dishes steaming, and a cake waiting at the end, not because it was my birthday, but simply because she wanted me to feel celebrated. Dad, she said as we sat down, I don't want your note to just be a wake-up call I eventually forget. I want it to be the moment everything changed between us. Her words struck me deeply. That note, just a few paragraphs scribbled in my shaky handwriting, had done what years of unspoken hurt never could. It had shaken her, woken her, reminded her that love needs to be nurtured, not assumed. Still, part of me remained cautious. I didn't want to live in the shadow of promises that might fade with time. So I held on to gratitude for the present moment, choosing to embrace what was before me rather than worry about what might come. That night, as I walked home under the dim glow of street lamps, I realized something important. Sometimes, people don't mean to hurt us by forgetting. Sometimes life pulls them so far into its storm that they lose sight of the anchors that hold them steady. My note hadn't been an act of anger. It had been a lifeline, pulling her back toward me, toward us. And though I didn't know what the future held, I knew this much. My daughter had remembered me, truly remembered, and that was enough for now. The following week, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard in years. The front gate creaking open and familiar footsteps making their way up my porch. My daughter was there again, this time with her 2 children trailing behind her. My grandchildren. They hadn't visited in months, maybe even longer. Their busy schedules, their soccer practices, their school projects, it all seemed to push me further down their list of priorities. But here they were, standing at my door with smiles that could melt the hardest heart. "Grandpa." They shouted in unison, rushing toward me. Their little arms wrapped around my waist, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. That hug was worth more than any gift I could have received. As they tumbled inside, my daughter followed with bags of groceries. "We're making dinner here tonight," she announced with a grin. The kids insisted. I raised an eyebrow, teasing. "The kids, huh, not you." She chuckled, but her eyes gave her away. She wanted to be here just as much as they did. The house filled with the sound of clattering pots, bubbling laughter, and playful arguments about who got to stir the sauce. I sat at the table, watching the chaos unfold, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in so long. For years, this house had been too quiet, its walls echoing only my thoughts. But that night, it felt alive again, alive with family, with love, with belonging. During dinner, my granddaughter suddenly looked at me with her curious eyes. "Grandpa, Mommy said she forgot your birthday. Did you forgive her?" Her innocence disarmed me. I smiled gently, nodding. Of course I forgave her. That's what families do. We make mistakes, and we forgive. That's how love works. My daughter's eyes welled up again, and she reached across the table to squeeze my hand. No words were needed. The gesture said everything. After they left, I sat in my favorite chair, the quiet returning but somehow feeling different, less heavy, less lonely. Because now I knew they would come back. The note had not only reminded her of me, but had also reignited the bond we all shared. Looking back, I realized how close I had been to giving up, to fading quietly into the background of their busy lives. But that simple act of writing down my feelings had changed the trajectory of our relationship. It was proof that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. I whispered to myself as I closed my eyes that night, "She remembered." And with that, I finally felt peace. The weeks that followed felt like a dream I didn't want to wake from. My daughter began visiting more often, sometimes bringing the kids, sometimes just coming alone to sit and talk. Each visit seemed to peel back another layer of distance that had grown between us over the years. One chilly afternoon, she arrived holding an old photo album I hadn't seen in decades. Its leather cover was cracked, its pages yellowed with time. But inside were snapshots of moments I had almost forgotten. Her first day of school, family picnics in the park, holidays when the house was overflowing with laughter. She flipped through the pages slowly, pausing at one where she was blowing out candles on a birthday cake. I was right behind her in the photo, smiling proudly. "You always made birthdays special," she whispered. Her words cut deep. Birthdays had always been my way of reminding her how loved she was. And yet, mine had slipped from her memory. I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I traced the edge of the photo with my finger and said, "Life gets busy, but we can always make new memories." She looked at me then, her eyes shining, and nodded. "I want to try, Dad. I really do." That night, after she left, I sat alone with the album. Memories washed over me, bittersweet but comforting. I realized something. Sometimes, people don't forget because they don't care. They forget because life piles so much on their shoulders that they lose sight of what matters. My note hadn't just shaken her memory, it had shifted her perspective. The following Sunday, I was surprised again. She invited me to her house for dinner. For years, I had always been the one inviting, the one waiting, the one hoping. but now she was reaching out, and it felt like a bridge had finally been rebuilt. When I arrived, the table was already set. My grandkids ran around, laughing, their dog barking in the background. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. It wasn't just a meal, it was a welcome. "Dad," she said as I sat down, "the kids wanted to make dessert for you. They said it has to be special." I chuckled. "Special, huh? Should I be worried?" Out came a cake, messy with frosting, uneven in shape, but beautiful in its imperfection. Candles flickered on top. "Blow them out, Grandpa," they shouted, their voices ringing with joy. Tears blurred my vision as I leaned forward. It wasn't my birthday, but in that moment, it felt like it was. It was as if they were rewriting the past, giving me the celebration I had missed. After the candles were blown out and the cake devoured, my daughter leaned over and whispered, "Dad, I don't just want to visit more. I want to make sure you never feel forgotten again." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. I believed her not because of the note I had written, but because I could see the sincerity in her eyes. As I drove home that night, the quiet of my house no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a pause between chapters, a silence waiting to be filled. And I realized something powerful. Sometimes, love doesn't disappear. It just gets buried under the noise of life. All it takes is a small reminder, a note, a gesture, a moment of honesty to bring it roaring back to the surface. That note had changed everything. The following weeks unfolded like the slow turning of a wheel, steady and purposeful. My daughter was no longer just a visitor at the edge of my life. She was present, engaged, and reaching out in ways I hadn't dared to hope for. One Saturday morning, she called me out of the blue. "Dad," she said, her voice lighter than I had heard in years, "do you want to come with us to the park? The kids are begging for you to join." It was such a simple invitation, but to me, it felt monumental. For years, I had been the one waiting, hoping for a call. Now, she was the one drawing me in. At the park, I watched my grandchildren race each other, their laughter ringing through the air. My daughter sat beside me on the bench, sipping coffee. "They adore you," she said softly. "I don't know why I kept you at a distance for so long." I looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "We all lose sight of things sometimes," I replied gently. "What matters is that you're here now." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the kids. "That note, Dad, it wasn't just words, it was a mirror. It made me see how much I'd been overlooking, and it scared me. Scared me that one day, it would be too late." Her honesty cut through the air like a blade, but instead of pain, I felt relief. She had understood. She had seen me, really seen me. Later that week, she showed up at my house with a box of old belongings she had found in storage. We spent hours sifting through them. Baby clothes, report cards, even the crayon drawings she once proudly taped to the fridge. Each item was like a thread pulling us closer together. At one point, she held up a faded card she had made for me in elementary school. "Happy birthday, Daddy." It read in uneven letters, with a stick figure drawing of the two of us holding hands. She stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "I used to think you were the strongest person in the world. I guess I forgot that even strong people need to feel loved." I reached out, covering her hand with mine. "We all need reminders," I said softly. That night, long after she left, I sat with the card in my lap. The years of distance, the loneliness, the silence, they all seemed to fade under the light of that small, childlike drawing. It reminded me that love doesn't vanish. It might be neglected, it might be buried, but it can always be uncovered. The changes weren't just in my daughter. I found myself changing too. The bitterness I had carried, the quiet resentment that had built up over the years, it began to dissolve. Instead, I felt lighter, more open. I even started writing again, filling pages with memories and reflections. Not letters of pain this time, but stories of gratitude. I realized that while my note had shaken my daughter, it had also shaken me. It reminded me that I wasn't powerless. I could speak my truth, and it mattered. One evening, she surprised me with something extraordinary. Dad,
cakes or decorations
she said over dinner,
scattered across
the kids and I want to plan a special day for you. Not just a meal, something you'll never forget.
I look forward to now
I laughed, shaking my head.
far simpler.
What are you plotting?
Softer.
You'll see. She teased,
call,
her eyes sparkling with the same mischief she used to have as a child.
In this world
when the
still.
day came, they
Remember
blindfolded
me that
me
I still
and drove me
matter.
across town. I could hear my grandchildren giggling in the back seat, whispering about the big reveal. When the blindfold came off, I was standing in front of a small community hall. Inside, the space had been decorated with streamers and balloons. A long table was covered in food, and at the center sat a cake, this time with my name written boldly in icing. Friends, neighbors, even distant relatives were there. It was a belated birthday celebration, orchestrated by my daughter and her children. "Dad," she said, tears glistening in her eyes, "I don't ever want you to think you don't matter. Not to me, not to them, not to anyone. You are the reason I am who I am." As everyone sang and the candles flickered before me, I realized that my note hadn't just reminded her, it had transformed her. And in doing so, it had transformed me too. I blew out the candles with a heart so full I thought it might burst. The wish I made wasn't for myself. It was for us, for this newfound bond, fragile yet fierce, that I prayed would never fade again. That night, as I hugged my daughter tightly before leaving, I whispered, "Thank you for remembering." She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes and said, "I'll never forget again." And in that moment, I knew she meant it. The belated birthday celebration stayed in my mind for weeks. Every time I thought about it, I felt like I had been given back something I thought was gone forever. Sense of belonging. For so long, I had sat in my quiet house, convinced that my role in my daughter's life had shrunk to nothing more than a distant memory. But now, I was woven back into the fabric of her days. One morning, a few weeks later, she called and asked if I could watch the kids while she ran errands. It may sound small, but for me, it was monumental. It meant trust. It meant she thought of me as someone important, someone reliable. When she dropped them off, the kids ran into the house like a storm of energy. We spent the afternoon baking cookies, building forts out of couch cushions, and telling silly stories. At one point, my grandson tugged at my sleeve and asked, "Grandpa, will you tell me what it was like when Mom was little?" I chuckled, settling into the chair. Oh, I could fill books with those stories. And so I did, at least for that afternoon. I told them about the time their mother tried to make mud pies in the kitchen, or when she insisted on wearing her princess costume to the grocery store. They laughed so hard they fell over, eyes wide with amazement at the idea of their mother as a mischievous little girl. When my daughter returned later, she saw the kids piled on the couch around me, their faces glowing. For the first time in years, she looked at me with the kind of gratitude that doesn't need words. That evening, she stayed after the kids had gone to bed. We sat at the table with cups of tea. There was a pause, and then she said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied. "Do you ever regret the way things turned out between us? The distance, the years I wasn't really here for you?" Her question was heavy, but I saw the vulnerability in her eyes. I leaned forward. "Regret, maybe. But what I've learned, sweetheart, is that regret doesn't heal anything. What matters is right now. And right now, we're here, talking, rebuilding. That's worth more than all the years we lost." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I don't know how I let it get that far. I guess I thought you were stronger than you really were. Like you didn't need anyone." I smiled gently. Even strong people need to be remembered. Even fathers need their children. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You'll never be forgotten again. I promise." Over the next months, her promise proved true. She called me almost every day, even if it was just for a quick hello. We shared dinners, family outings, even late-night talks when she needed advice. I felt like I had been given a second chance, not just as a father, but as a man whose voice still mattered. But life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. One evening, she arrived at my house looking worn out, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She dropped onto the couch and sighed heavily. "Dad, everything feels like too much lately. Work, the kids, the bills I don't know how to keep up." I listened quietly, letting her pour it out. When she finally stopped, I said, "Do you know what helped me all those years raising you alone? Notes. I used to write myself little reminders. You're doing your best, or one step at a time. Sometimes, you need words to remind you that you're stronger than you feel." She looked at me thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why your note hit me so hard. It wasn't just about you, it made me realize how much I needed to slow down and remember what matters." I smiled. "Maybe it's time you write yourself a note." That night, she did. She showed me the next day, Don T. Rush. "The people you love are more important than the things you chase." I pinned it to her fridge with a magnet, and we both stood there, smiling. The irony wasn't lost on me. The note that had shaken her was now inspiring her to write her own. And in that small act, I saw the cycle continuing: words, healing, reminding, grounding us. As I walked home that evening, I thought about the journey we had taken, from forgotten birthdays, to notes that bridged silence, to promises spoken over cups of tea. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, imperfect, real, but it was ours. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt certain I was not forgotten. I never would be again. The ride home was quieter than usual, though I could feel the electricity of unspoken words buzzing around us. She gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, her knuckles pale in the dim glow of the dashboard. I sat beside her, hands folded in my lap, the note now resting safely in her purse. My heart, though, was anything but calm. It raced, uncertain of what lay ahead. Would she truly change? Or would this moment fade as quickly as it had come? When we reached the driveway, she didn't rush inside like she usually did. Instead, she cut the engine, leaving us cloaked in silence. She turned toward me, eyes glistening in the faint porch light. "I don't know how I forgot, Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I swear to you, I won't let it happen again." I nodded slowly. Promises were easy to make in moments of guilt. Keeping them, that was the true test. "We'll see," I said softly, not out of bitterness but from years of learned caution. My heart wanted to believe her, but my soul had grown weary of empty assurances. She reached for my hand, squeezing it, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't pull away. Inside, the house felt different. She lingered near me, setting her bag down carefully, watching my every move as if she were afraid I might slip away into the shadows of resentment. I went to the kitchen, and she followed, leaning against the counter while I filled the kettle. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Finally, she spoke. "Do you want to tell me more about today? About how you felt?" The question startled me. Usually, she avoided feelings like one avoids stepping into puddles, uncomfortable, messy, unnecessary. I glanced at her, searching for insincerity, but her eyes held only curiosity and regret. So, I told her. Not everything, not yet, but I shared how it felt waking up alone, how I had counted the hours until evening, clinging to the hope that she'd remember. How disappointment felt like a cold draft under the door, seeping in no matter how tightly you tried to shut it. Her shoulders sank as I spoke, and she didn't try to interrupt or defend herself. She just listened. That alone was a gift. Later that night, when I lay in bed, I thought about the small changes already stirring. Maybe the note had truly shaken something in her, not just guilt but awareness. Awareness of how fragile time was, how fleeting opportunities were to show love before it was too late. I closed my eyes, whispering a prayer that this spark would not be extinguished by the weight of daily life. The days that followed were tentative but promising. On the morning after my birthday, she knocked gently on my door before leaving for work. "I made you some tea," she said, placing the cup on my bedside table. It wasn't much, but the gesture carried more warmth than 1,000 apologies. Small acts began to stack up like pebbles, slowly building a bridge between us. She sat with me more often, asked questions about my past, even laughed at stories she'd heard a dozen times before. Each moment felt like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Still, doubt lingered. A single storm could undo fragile repairs. I reminded myself to remain patient, to savor the effort rather than demand perfection. Love, after all, was not about flawless gestures but about presence showing up when it mattered most. And for the first time in years, she was showing up. One evening, as we sat together watching an old movie, she turned to me suddenly. "I've been thinking," she said, "we should start making traditions. Just ours. Things we don't forget." My chest tightened at her words. Traditions. That was what I had longed for, not grand celebrations, but consistency. Proof that I mattered enough to be remembered. "What kind of traditions?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe Sunday dinners," she suggested, "or monthly outings, just us. And on birthdays, we'll make it a rule, no forgetting, ever." I laughed then, a sound I hadn't realized I'd been holding back for too long. That sounds like a rule I can live with. And in that moment, I realized the note hadn't just reminded her of my birthday, had reminded her of me. The me she'd overlooked, the me she'd taken for granted, the me who still had stories to tell, love to give, and wisdom to share. I knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be days when life's noise threatened to drown out what was important. But now, she carried the note with her, both in her purse and, I hoped, in her heart. And that gave me hope that even when memories faltered, love could still be remembered. The weeks that followed were like stepping into unfamiliar yet comforting territory. I had grown so accustomed to the silence, to being overlooked, that her sudden attentiveness felt almost foreign. Each gesture, though small, carried a weight that words alone could never hold. A cup of tea, a seat saved for me at the table, a question asked about my day. These things might seem ordinary to most, but to me, they were extraordinary. They were signs that I was no longer invisible. One morning, I found a little sticky note on my dresser. It read, *, "Have a wonderful day, Mom. Don't forget your scarf, it's chilly outside." *, my throat tightened as I read it, not because of the reminder, but because she had taken the time to write it. The irony wasn't lost on me. A single note had once broken me, and now her notes began stitching me back together. We began our Sunday dinners just as she had promised. The first one was simple roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and vegetables, yet it felt like a banquet. She lit candles, set the table, and even played some of my favorite old songs in the background. We laughed, we ate, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like family. But with joy came fear. I wondered constantly, would this last? Or was this simply a temporary wave of guilt, soon to fade back into old habits? That question haunted me, especially late at night when the house grew quiet. I didn't want to cling too tightly, afraid of scaring away the fragile peace that was forming. At the same time, I wanted so desperately for it to root itself firmly in our lives. One evening, as we cleared the dishes, I finally asked her, "Do you think this will last?" My voice was low, almost ashamed of its vulnerability. She paused, dish towel in her hand, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, one of honesty. "Yes," she said simply. "It has to. Because I don't want to live in a world where I forget you again." Her words settled over me like a blanket, warm and heavy with promise. In that moment, I believed her not because she said it, but because she was proving it day after day. As I went to bed that night, I realized something. Maybe the note hadn't just reminded her of me. Maybe it had reminded me, of myself, too. Of my worth, my place, and the fact that even when forgotten, I still mattered. And now, finally, she was beginning to see it too. The following days carried a quiet ease, the kind that seeps into life when wounds begin to heal. My daughter's small gestures didn't just fill the gaps, they rebuilt a bridge I thought had long collapsed. Sometimes she'd sit with me in the evening, no phones, no distractions, just the two of us sharing stories as though time had never stolen them away. One night, she surprised me with a framed photo. It was of us from years ago, her 5th birthday, frosting on her cheeks, my arms wrapped around her. Beneath it, she had written, "I don't ever want to forget again." I cried, not from sadness, but from gratitude. That frame wasn't just a gift. It was a promise. I woke up on the morning of my birthday,
moments,
with a quiet
and love
kind
would
of
no longer slip
anticipation
past
in my heart.
unnoticed.
At my
As I
age,
held
I
it
don't
close,
expect
I
grand
realized
party
my note
surprise.
had done more than
Cakes
shake her
or
memory. It had
decorations
opened her
scattered across
heart.
the
And in
living room
turn,
anymore.
she
No,
reminded
those
me that
days are long
forgiveness wasn't
behind.
about forgetting the
Me,
pain,
what I look
but
forward
choosing
to
to build
now is
something stronger in
something
its
far
place.
simpler,
The
something
seasons
softer,
shifted, and with them,
phone
the
call,
rhythm
a
of my
message,
days.
a sign,
But one thing remained
that the people
steady:
I love
my
most
daughter's
in this
presence.
world still
She visited
remember
more often
me,
now,
that I still
sometimes
matter.
without a reason at all. She'd show up on a Tuesday afternoon with groceries, or drop by on a Saturday just to sit on the porch swing and sip tea beside me. At first, I thought it was just guilt driving her. But slowly, I realized it wasn't guilt. It was love, rekindled and genuine. Somewhere between my note and her tears, she had remembered not just who I was, but who we were together. One evening, as the golden light spilled across the yard, she asked me something that stopped me in my tracks. "Dad, what do you want for your next birthday?" I laughed at first, thinking it was a simple question. But then I saw her eyes soft, searching, wanting to make up for what she had once forgotten. I leaned back, thinking, "All I want," I said, "is time. Time with you, time with family. That's the only gift worth having." She nodded, and for a long while, we just sat there, letting the quiet fill the space. Inside me, something shifted. For months, I had carried the ache of being forgotten, but now, watching her care enough to ask, I felt that ache dissolving. The hurt didn't vanish overnight, but it softened, making room for something stronger. And then, unexpectedly, she pulled a small notebook from her bag. She placed it in my hands and smiled. "It's empty," she said, "but I thought we could fill it together. With memories, stories, whatever you want. That way, nothing gets forgotten again." My throat tightened. I opened the notebook and ran my fingers across the blank pages. Each one felt like a second chance. A chance not just for me to leave behind words, but for us to create something that would outlive birthdays and broken promises. I closed it gently, looked at her, and whispered, "Thank you." That evening, I realized something profound. Being remembered isn't about one day circled on a calendar. It's about the everyday choices, the visits, the conversations, the laughter that lingers after the teacups are empty. And with that, I knew this chapter of forgetting had ended. In its place, a new story had begun, one where love wasn't assumed, but actively lived. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting often on how a single note, a few lines scribbled in the quiet of my loneliness, had changed everything. I hadn't written it to demand attention or to guilt my daughter into remembering me. I had written it because my heart needed to be heard. And in being honest, in daring to show my vulnerability, I had reminded her of something she had forgotten. Love requires remembering. My daughter's efforts didn't fade with time. She began calling more regularly, sometimes even twice a day, just to check in. And when her birthday came, she surprised me by turning the tables, organizing a small gathering with family, laughter, and stories. She even baked me a cake, insisting she owed me at least 20 more. I chuckled, knowing it wasn't about repayment, it was about renewal. On the night of that gathering, as I blew out the candles, I didn't wish for riches or more years. My wish was simple, let this bond stay strong. For I had learned that relationships don't wither because of time, but because we stop watering them with presence, effort, and care. The framed photo she'd given me now hangs proudly in my living room. And beside it, the notebook sits, slowly filling with our scribbles. Little stories, jokes, even recipes we've tried together. Each page is a reminder that we are choosing to remember, day by day. Sometimes, when I glance at that photo or flip through the notebook, I think back to that lonely birthday, the one that felt like the end of something. In truth, it was the beginning. The note I wrote in despair had planted a seed of awareness in her heart, and from it grew something richer than I ever imagined. A renewed relationship. If you're listening to this, perhaps you've felt forgotten too. Maybe someone you love has overlooked your presence, your milestones, your worth. Let me tell you this: don't stay silent. Speak your truth, with love. Sometimes people don't mean to forget,
they simply get lost in their own worlds. And sometimes, all it takes is a gentle reminder, a heartfelt note, to bring them back. I used to believe being forgotten was the worst pain in the world. But now, I know what's worse: giving up before you give love a chance to be remembered. My daughter forgot once. Yes, but she didn't stay blind, and I didn't stay silent. That's how one note turned a forgotten birthday into a lesson neither of us will ever forget. And to you, dear listener, remember, love isn't about grand gestures. It's about the quiet choices, the small acts of remembering every single day.